Man, Timberwolves fans, today we've got two stories to talk about, and somehow both of them say a lot about where this franchise is right now. The first one is the serious one, because there's a massive decision the Wolves made this offseason that could end up defining not only whether this team can keep up with the monsters in the Western Conference, but also the legacy and future of the person responsible for building this roster. There's real pressure here, guys. The kind where, if it works, everybody looks like a genius. And if it doesn't, people are going to remember exactly what was sacrificed to make it happen. And then the second story is completely different. We're going from front office pressure and championship expectations to one of the funniest, most unexpected answers I've heard from an NBA player in a while. Seriously, when you hear the three people this guy picked, you're probably going to have the exact same reaction I did. Where did that come from? So yeah, we've got a lot to get into today. But before we do, if you're enjoying the video, hit that like button. And if you're a real Timberwolves fan, consider subscribing. I'm Henry, this channel is still new, and we're chasing our first 100 subscribers. I want those first 100 to be people who genuinely care about this team, because there's something pretty cool about being part of this community from the very beginning. Alright, Wolves fans, let's get into the first story. Now let's get into that first story, because this is where things get serious for Minnesota. Tim Connolly has never been afraid to gamble. We saw that before he ever arrived in Minnesota when he was running the Denver Nuggets. And we've definitely seen it since he joined the Timberwolves in the 2022 offseason. Connolly has consistently operated like an executive who believes that if you see a window to win, you don't just sit there protecting yourself. You make the move. And now he may have made the move that ultimately defines his entire run with the Timberwolves. Minnesota traded away Naz Reid, one of the biggest fan favorites this franchise had, in the deal that brought Lamelo Ball to the Timberwolves. And guys, that's not a small thing. When you trade a player the fan base loves as much as Naz Reid, you better have a reason. Fans can understand being aggressive. They can understand taking risks when you're trying to win a championship. But when you give up somebody who became part of the identity of the team, the player coming back has to make that pain worth it. And that's why there is so much pressure on Lamelo Ball, but also on Tim Connolly. Because Minnesota needed something. The Timberwolves had reached the Western Conference Finals in each of the previous two seasons before going one round less far in the 2026 playoffs. For a while, it felt like this team was getting closer and closer to finally breaking through and reaching the first NBA Finals in franchise history. But the Western Conference is not waiting for Minnesota. You've got the Oklahoma City Thunder, who won the championship the year before, and you've got the San Antonio Spurs. Those two teams were at the top of the Western Conference last season, and the scary part is that neither one looks like they're going away anytime soon. That changes the equation for Minnesota. Yes, Anthony Edwards continues developing into a legitimate superstar. That's obviously the foundation of everything the Timberwolves are trying to build. But you cannot just look at Anthony Edwards becoming better every year and assume everything else is going to take care of itself. Connolly understood that, and that's where Lamelo Ball comes into this. Minnesota needed another playmaker, and Lamelo gives them exactly that. He can create, he can pass, he can score, he can change the pace of an offense. And the offensive numbers from his time with the Charlotte Hornets showed just how different that team could look with him on the floor compared with when he was off it. Now you put that kind of creator next to Anthony Edwards? Come on. The upside is obvious. There are going to be possessions where defenses have to decide whether they want to load up on Ant or allow Lamelo to operate with space. And that could make Minnesota much more unpredictable offensively. But here's the part that makes me nervous. There is real risk attached to this. Lamelo is about to turn 25 years old, and despite all of his talent, he has never played in a postseason game. Not one. And his injury history cannot just be ignored. He was mostly healthy last season, which is encouraging, although part of that may have been connected to the fact that his minutes were managed to help keep him healthy. So now you're asking him to come into Minnesota, stay healthy, learn how to play next to Anthony Edwards, experience playoff basketball for the first time, and help push a team with championship expectations through a brutal Western Conference. That is a massive responsibility. And Minnesota sacrificed size to get the playmaking it desperately needed. That's why this trade really is boom or bust. If Lamelo stays healthy and this backcourt works, we could look back and say Tim Connolly recognized exactly what Minnesota was missing and had the guts to do something about it. But if it fails, that conversation gets ugly very quickly. Because Connolly didn't just take a basketball risk. Minnesota also gave up valuable draft capital in making this happen. And this is where the story becomes about much more than LaMelo Ball. Tim Connolly is entering the final year of his contract with Minnesota. Think about that. The executive responsible for making these huge decisions is currently going into the season without long-term security himself. Normally, teams don't love having the person making major roster decisions operating in that kind of lame duck situation. But that is where the Timberwolves currently stand. Maybe ownership wants to see what this new version of the roster actually looks like before committing to Connolly long-term. And if that's the case, you can understand why. Because when you look back at Connolly's Minnesota tenure, there have been hits and misses. The Rudy Gobert trade was absolutely destroyed by people when it happened. Everybody remembers that. Minnesota was accused of massively overpaying, but over time, that move looked a whole lot better than many people initially believed it would. Connolly also deserves credit for acquiring Nickel Alexander-Walker and Mike Conley, and for the move to bring in Ayo Dosunmu. Those are legitimate wins, but there have been misses too. Minnesota made the trade with the San Antonio Spurs to acquire the draft pick used on Rob Dillingham, and that has been questioned. And allowing Nickel Alexander-Walker to leave in free agency is another decision that belongs on the other side of the ledger. So Connolly's resume here isn't perfect. But I think that actually makes this LaMelo Ball trade even more fascinating. Because this could become the move that overwhelms everything else. If Minnesota becomes a legitimate NBA Finals team with LaMelo and Anthony Edwards together, people are going to remember Connolly as the guy willing to make uncomfortable decisions when everybody else might have played it safe. If Minnesota takes a step backward in the 2026 to 2027 season, though the perception could completely change, instead of being remembered as this brilliant, fearless basketball mind, Connolly could be remembered as somebody who gambled one too many times. And even if Minnesota decided not to bring him back, I don't believe that means Tim Connolly would never run another NBA team. His track record is too significant for that. But another opportunity might not come quite as quickly if this goes badly. That is what makes this season so fascinating. It's not only about whether LaMelo Ball works next to Anthony Edwards, it's about whether Tim Connolly's entire vision for this franchise was right. And speaking of LaMelo, we have to get into our second story, because this one is a lot less stressful. LaMelo Ball was recently asked who he would most like to see wearing his signature shoes. Now, when an NBA star gets asked something like that, you're probably expecting other basketball players, right? Maybe some current superstars? Maybe a few legends. Nope, LaMelo went somewhere completely different. His three choices were Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X. I'm sorry, man, but that is such a LaMelo Ball answer. You ask this dude about his shoes, and somehow we end up with Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X. You cannot predict this guy. And that personality is something Timberwolves fans are about to experience a whole lot more of now that LaMelo is in Minnesota. He arrived from the Charlotte Hornets in July as part of a 4-team trade, and now he's forming that new backcourt with Anthony Edwards. Basketball-wise, we already talked about the pressure attached to that partnership, but personality-wise, this could be one of the most entertaining star backcourts in the league. Anthony Edwards already has one of the biggest personalities in basketball. Now, you put LaMelo next to him, another guy who is completely comfortable being himself, and there is going to be no shortage of interesting moments around this team. And LaMelo isn't coming to Minnesota without a resume either. Through his first 6 NBA seasons, Ball averaged 20.8 points, 7.3 assists, and 5.7 rebounds across 303 games. He also won Rookie of the Year and became an NBA All-Star. So, behind all the personality and all the crazy quotes, there is a seriously talented basketball player here. And there's another business side to LaMelo's profile as well. He is a signature athlete with Puma and his 6th signature shoe with the company. The Puerto Rico Puma MB06 was unveiled last month in Puerto Rico. So when he was asked who he wanted to see wearing his shoes, he definitely could have gone with the safe basketball answer. Instead, he gave us Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X. Welcome to the LaMelo Ball experience, Minnesota. And when you put these two stories together, I think they actually capture why this upcoming Timberwolves season is going to be so interesting. On one side, there is enormous pressure. Tim Connolly is entering the final year of his contract after making one of the boldest moves of his Minnesota tenure. Nez Reid is gone. Draft capital was sacrificed. Lamelo Ball is here. And Minnesota is trying to keep pace with Oklahoma City, San Antonio, and everybody else coming for the Western Conference. There are championship expectations attached to this. There should be. When you have Anthony Edwards entering his prime, and you make a move this aggressive, you're not doing it just to have a fun regular season, you're trying to win. And on the other side, we're getting our first taste of everything that comes with having Lamelo around this team. The talent, the personality, the unpredictability. I'm excited, but I'm also not pretending there aren't reasons to be nervous. For me, everything comes back to health and fit. If Lamelo stays on the floor and develops real chemistry with Anthony Edwards, the offensive ceiling of this team changes dramatically. Minnesota finally has another high-level creator who can take some of that responsibility away from Anthony. But if the injuries return, or if the fit doesn't work the way Connolly envisioned, people are going to immediately start looking at what Minnesota gave up to make this happen. That's the pressure. And that's what makes following this team so much fun right now. There is a lot on the line. So Wolves fans, I really want to hear from you on this one. Do you believe the Lamelo Ball trade is going to prove Tim Connolly right? Or do you think Minnesota took too big of a gamble? And please tell me what you thought when you heard Lamelo's 3 choices for who should wear his shoes. Because I know I wasn't expecting that answer. If you enjoyed talking Wolves with me today, hit the like button and jump into the comments. And if you genuinely believe in where this Timberwolves team is going, subscribe to the channel. We're still building this community from the ground up, and our first goal is 100 subscribers. I want those first 100 to be real Wolves fans who can eventually say they were here before this community really started growing. Whatever happens with this team, we're going through it together. I'm Henry, and I'll see you in the next one.